All right, so this is building your knowledge, change over time. A quick survey of Earth's biodiversity reveals that for all their differences, living things have a lot of anatomical or structural similarities. Butterflies come in all colors, shapes, and sizes, but each has 4 wings and 2 antennae. And like all insects, butterflies have 6 legs and an exoskeleton. How do they share so many parts yet differ so much? Populations of living things change over time. How does this change happen? Well, individuals with traits that help them better survive are more likely to reproduce. So this might be an example of something like an insect that can camouflage into its surroundings. That insect is more likely to survive than another insect that might not blend in so well because of its colors, because it's not getting hunted and eaten. So therefore, that animal can survive long enough to reproduce, and it's likely that it's going to pass on those traits to its offspring. When they reproduce, they pass on these helpful traits to their offspring, which are their children. The offspring then have a better chance of surviving and can continue to pass on these helpful traits to the next generation. If this passing on of the helpful traits continues, it can cause an entire species to eventually have this trait. Populations and species change over time. This change in the inherited traits is called evolution. Beneficial traits, or traits that help the animal or the organism within a population that help individuals survive and reproduce, are adaptations. So those beneficial traits that help individuals survive and reproduce are called adaptations. As the environment changes, certain traits or adaptations that were once considered to be beneficial no longer are. So think for the example in science when we looked at the whale and how the whale used to have legs. Well, once those legs were no longer beneficial to the animal, then over time the animal lost those limbs. The opposite can be true as well. Certain traits that were once considered to be negative could be considered beneficial when an environmental change happens. It's important to note that each adaptation builds on the original form as organisms evolve. So populations share a lot of common traits even when they become different enough to be classified as distinct species. Think wolves and dogs. One example of a structure that has been modified over time is the forelimb of different tetrapods, and that just means four-limbed animals. So animals with four, in our case, it would be 2 arms and 2 legs. In dogs' cases, it would be 4 legs, and so on. Whales, frogs, horses, lions, humans, birds, and many other animals share the same arrangement of forelimb bones, but each animal uses the forelimb differently. Swimming, running, and flying are easier if the limbs providing motion have certain proportions. Sometimes scientists theorize that four-limbed animals share a common ancestor that lived millions of years ago. This ancestor had one set of forelimb bones, and a modified version of this set is found in all of its descendants. As new species evolved over time, the bones changed, getting longer or shorter and thicker or thinner to meet different needs. So we're going to just look up at this picture right here and kind of notice that all of them have some similarities in common. They all have a bigger bone right up here, right? So that's something that they all share. And most of them have the 2 little bones as well. Not all of them, but most of them. And if you'll notice, most of them have what looks to be finger bones as well. Even the whale has those bones inside of its flippers. So even though they may not be used by the whale anymore, and even the bird, even though those organisms aren't using them, they kind of never went away, and we can kind of see how the common ancestor had that impact on how their bones are laid out. So sometimes people can examine body structures of organisms that are no longer living. Fossils demonstrate that ancient plants and animals had unique anatomical parts, and this is kind of referring to this picture here. Many fossilized organisms also have parts that are similar to living organisms. For example, fossils of ammonites, which is the one that the arrow is pointing to, which are a cephalopod with spiral shells, look similar to the nautilus, a cephalopod that's living today. So if you look at their shells, they're very similar, even though one of them is now extinct and we can look at its fossils, whereas the other one is still alive today. In some cases, the variety of available fossils helps us understand how a modern species evolved. For example, fossils show that the earliest horse-like animals were dog-sized and lived 55 million years ago. So many horse-like fossils have been found that scientists can make a timeline of how these species have changed over time. Such evolutionary relationships are often represented as tree-like diagrams. Each branch tip represents a species or group of species. Each point where 2 branches come together represents a common ancestor in history. Animals with more shared traits are usually more closely related. So if we look at this trait, I'm going to circle humans. And you'll notice they're very close to chimpanzees. But if we follow this common ancestor, so we're going to start here and follow the common ancestor, we'll see that humans kind of share one common ancestor here with marsupials, which are like kangaroos, with chimpanzees, cows, and whales. And these are all mammals. And then it breaks off, we're a little closer, we have that common ancestor with marsupials. Whoop. If you keep going, and you'll find out that there's another common ancestor here, and that's kind of where it breaks off and goes into snakes, lizards. Break off here, there's another one. We get into amphibians and fish, another common ancestor, another one, and it kind of goes so on and so forth until you get down here to the one common ancestor. And you don't have to know this diagram specifically, but just kind of know that the gist of it is that some organisms are closer, have more traits, and they're closer related than others. And you can kind of trace it back to one common ancestor